Greetings, everyone. Just checking to see if the stream is running. If anyone could just type anything in the chat right now, just so I know that I'm online here. It looks like everything's going good. Today we're going to be going over epistemology. So let's see, is anyone out there? Let's see if I can get anything going out there into the YouTube world. And it appears like it is. I don't see a notification. That's not good. Live. Okay, looks like it might be. Check. Yes, we're there. Okay. Welcome, everyone. Okay, we're going to be doing a nice deep dive on epistemology. Give me a moment here. Let me get this thing back up and running here. And again, take a deep dive into it. So let's start right into it. The 20th century Westerner prides himself or herself on the plethora of choices he or she may exercise. With the proper amount of capital, a Westerner can, for example, choose to buy a Chevrolet Blazer or a Toyota four-wheel drive pickup or possibly a Ford Mustang. More importantly, he can even choose not to have an automobile. Similarly, modern Westerners can choose an empirically based epistemology or a spiritually based epistemology, even a nihilistic epistemology. But most importantly, they cannot not have an epistemology. They may not want one. They may even resist with all their resources some particular epistemology. But resistance itself, in such a case, would be an epistemological act. A quarter of a century or so ago, Gregory Bateson recognized and coded in his writings a profound fact about human communication, so obvious that it had literally escaped the work of quite able researchers in the field of human behavior for centuries. When two members of our species are face to face and one offers a communication to the other, all other aspects of the situation being conventional, an example, the communication offered falls within the sensory channels of the other person, meaning that they can hear or see, and you're doing it with communication of visual, audio correspondingly, then the second person cannot not communicate. There is, of course, plenty of latitude and many choices about how the second person may communicate in responding. Words, gestures, sound, movement, all of which will be properly perceived by the first person as responses to their first communication. Notice even the limiting case, the refusal to respond, is itself a communication. When someone says to you that they cannot communicate with so-and-so, their position is epistemologically unsound. What they mean is that they are as yet unable to elicit from this particular so-and-so the responses they want. Communication and epistemology are similar in this respect. They are ubiquitous. One cannot not communicate, and further, one cannot not have an epistemology. It may be unconscious, unwanted, entirely inaccessible to his owner, but it is revealed with precision by that person's behavior. Epistemology is a human discipline which systematically explores the possibility of human knowledge, beginning with questions of what we can know and how we can come to know what we think we know. Epistemology moves to the question, can we know anything at all? The fact that epistemology is considered esoteric by Westerners is a telling indicator of how unexamined the foundation of our own beliefs, values, and perceptions is, and critically, therefore, how unexamined is the foundation of those behaviors which flow from our beliefs, values, and perceptions. Westerners are usually amused the first few times they encounter the tongue-in-cheek definitions of a pessimist and an optimist. A pessimist is a person who perceives, values, and acts upon a container which has 50% of its volume as half empty, while an optimist, we are assured, perceives, values, and acts upon the container as if it were half full. Somewhat less amusing are anecdotes, such as the putative Head Start experiment done in New York some decades ago. A group of children of the same age group were randomly sorted into two groups, A and B. These groups then took a battery of IQ and achievement tests, and the differences in the test scores between the two groups were negligible. Next, the teachers who would, in the approaching school year, be responsible for instructing, for educating these young people, were told that the test results indicated that Group A was educationally gifted, while Group B was educationally handicapped. When the two groups were retested on the same battery of tests 6 months later, the scores revealed that the children and the teachers had managed to make it work out just right. Group A tested gifted, and Group B handicapped. Anyone still there? I want to make sure we still got people here in the chat. If so, please hit the like so we know you're there. Let's continue. Clear. Okay, come on. Something going on here. Oops. Give me some moment here. Oh. All right. No big deal. I'm just trying to clear this one out. There we go. All right. Are we back online? Looks like it is. All right. Finally, entirely unamusing are the stories which filter anemically through the reducing value we call our national press, which chronicle the inability of our political leaders to find equitable resolutions to the differences which are daily in Central America, Afghanistan, the Middle East, killing men, women, and children who simply want to live in peace. Each of these are quickly and easily traceable to epistemological differences which remain unexplored. So much of this document was inspired by the work of Gregory Bateson, that we believe it is useful for the reader to have some appreciation of the context to which he was responding. Bateson was a highly creative, synthetic thinker. By synthetic, we refer to his ability to discern pattern, independent of substance or context. And with breathtaking moves, he brought together, in a convincing way, materials which had previously been completely unassociated, thereby revealing a deeper and more satisfying pattern. So what were the salient epistemological positions to which he was responding? The two classical epistemological polar positions in the 18th century can be usefully represented by Hume in the British empirist tradition, and Kant in the German idealist tradition. We will crudely sketch these positions. The basic organizing principle in the empirist tradition was alarmingly simple. There is nothing in the mind which did not come from the senses. A position like this, when badly presented as we have articulated here, seems disturbingly incomplete, and this is correct. The context in which it was formulated is missing. If you had been raised in an environment where learned men were hotly debating the number of angels who could dance on the head of a pin, the above empiricist doctrine would have been a breath of fresh air. The difficulty with this position is that it rejects human beings as active agents in creating experience. More fundamentally, it cannot account for one of the most elementary experiences of the human condition. Two human beings witnessing the same real-world event will subsequently provide differences in their individual accounts of what occurred. Differences which become more numerous as one demands more and more detail in their accounts. On the other pole in this controversy was Kant, who bit off a lot more than was either chewable or digestible. The famous Kantian solution was to assign to each human being a set of innate, genetically specified categories through which we experience the world, what we would call in the following document perceptual filters. Kant certainly recognizes with his innate categories of perception a tremendous contribution to experience on the part of the human beings involved. Unfortunately, however, the cost is exorbitant. If our experiences are the result of deeply set filters, independent of the real world, then our ability to know the world starts to deteriorate rapidly, and the world begins to get rather slippery. It is amusing to note that Kant's position settles into an equally unattractive consequence at the individual level, with respect to the same differences of perception issue on which Hume failed. Either Kant similarly cannot account for differences in perception, or must assign them to faulty neurology, or to faulty neurological developments of the innate categories. In either case, we believe Bateson would have commented, "Shoddy epistemology." Any questions so far? There are 2 points on which both of these epistemological positions are quite unsatisfactory. First, note that in both cases, there is little room for individual responsibility. If the real world impresses certain sensations on the individual neurology as a function of the physical properties of the stimulus, or if we experience the stimulus sensation solely as a function of innate perceptual categories. The question of personal responsibility is moot. The second point is the way these positions fall out with respect to the mind-body split. Hume and his troupe are condemned to wander about, entertaining all and only experiences which are sensory-based, while Kant and his band sit immobilized, locked into their individual neurologies. Hume and the empirists have the task of freeing themselves from the tyranny of an exclusively sensory world, while Kant and his idealist, trapped in mental categories, try to find a way back out to the real world. Those readers who have had experience working professionally with mental patients will recognize these two positions as characteristic syndromes of patient populations. Thus, with respect to the mind-body issue, the empiricists have to make do with patterning exclusively in the physical world. Psychology collapses into physics, while the idealist must fight for and justify each and every link from their starting position, the mind, to the world, if any such connections can be demonstrated. How would we know? In fact, the mentalist position, unburdened with any anchor to the physical world, historically tends to float off in the direction of spiritualism. So this is really interesting here when you break apart the different approaches to epistemology from a philosophical standpoint. So here is very well written here. The mind-body split. Hume and his troupe are condemned to wander about entertaining all and only experiences which are sensory-based, while Kant and his band sit immobilized, locked into their individual neurologies. Hume and the empiricists have the task of freeing themselves from the tyranny of an exclusively sensory world. Right? These are the empirists, while Kant and his idealist, trapped in mental categories, try to find a way back out to the real world. Those readers who have experienced, so we've read this part, I just want to get to that, the mind-body issue. The empiricists have to make do with pattern exclusively in the physical world. Psychology collapses into physics, while the idealists must fight for and justify each and every link from their starting position in the mind, subjective, to the world, objective, and any such connections, if any such connections can be demonstrated. Now we get to the epistemology. How would we know? In fact, the mentalist position, unburdened with any anchor to the physical world, historically tends to float off in the direction of spiritualism. So that's their epistemology. Thus, we have the general intellectual climate which Bateson was addressing. The trick was to synthesize the two polar and obviously overdrawn positions of empiricists and idealists. By accident of his birth, he tended to start with the empirist tradition and find ways of rebalancing it. He knew, in a very deep way, that the 19th and 20th century methodological seduction of psychology by the preeminently successful physical sciences was an historical tragedy, a muddleness of astonishing proportions, an error of both logical typing and logical level. Yet his task was to demonstrate that there are fundamental differences between the patterns of the physical sensible world and the patterns of the world in the mind, without falling into mysticism. He argued this point in a number of ways. He was, for example, quite intolerant of the fuzzy kind of thinking characteristic of the uncritical importation into discussions of the mind of the physical phenomenon of energy. If a billiard ball A strikes billiard ball B with a certain velocity, mass, and angle of impact, and the frictional characteristics of the surface they are both supported by are specified, then certain things are knowable. All right, we got some people in the house here. Come on, see if this is working. There we go. All right. Let's continue. Okay, so again, we're with the billiard ball impact. Ball A strikes ball B with certain velocity, mass, angle of impact, and the frictional characteristics of the surface are both supported by or specified, then certain things are knowable. 1, the final resting places of A and B. And 2, independent of the particular values of A and B with respect to mass, speed, angle, and of impact, one may state with confidence that the second law of thermodynamics will be respected. An example, the physical energy embodied in the original moving billiard ball prior to impact will be preserved, accounted for, in the ensuing collision. So all the energy will be accounted for in this transfer. Any losses that won't be transferred can be attributed and calculated as dissipation with the friction of the surface, etc. Right. In other words, in non-living systems, there's a conservation of energy. That's our law of thermodynamics. A pattern apparently universally present. Just making sure I'm still connected here. All right, we're still on there. Just going to make sure we're still connected. Looks like we are. Cool. All right. In other words, in non-living systems, there's a conservation of energy, a pattern apparently universally present in non-living systems, right? Contrast this with an analogous interaction in living systems. If I specify for you the starting position, velocity, mass, angle, and point of contact of my foot and my dog, Spirit, you will not be able to predict much. It's not even obvious that my foot will end up on the end of my dog's leg, as opposed to ending up in Spirit's mouth some distance away from the rest of my leg. To distinguish this non-conservative interaction, the typical one in living systems, from its counterpart in the physical world, Bateson referred to this as collateral energy. Collateral energy. Or again, his brilliant insight that both Darwin and Lamarck were correct. Darwin's evolutionary contracts fit adequately the presently known world of biological forms, and Lamarck's evolutionary constructs are the drivers in that cultural world of ideas. Is another example of his steadfast insistence that different patterns were operating in the physical world and the world of the mind. While Bateson was unwavering in his perception that the patterns and laws which specify the structure of the world of mind and the physical were distinct, he never proposed a mechanism to explain how this difference came about. Bateson's thesis itself is strongly supported by a contemporary of his, the man usually considered the leading physicist of the 20th century. So let's get this clear here, because this is a complex concept here. So there's evolutionary contracts with the known world of the biological forms that Darwin was pointing out, and Lamarck's evolutionary constructs are the drivers in that cultural world of ideas. So he's insisting that the different patterns were operating in a physical world and the world of the mind. Two different things are going on here. And while Bateson was unwavering in his perception that the patterns and laws which specify the structure of the world of mind and the physical were distinct, He never proposed a mechanism to explain how this difference came about. Why is the structure of mind different than the structure of the world, the physical world? So let's see what the leading physicist of the 20th century has to say about this. It was Albert Einstein from his autobiographical notes, page 13. I see, on the one side, the totality of sense experiences, and on the other, the totality of the concepts and propositions. The relations between the concepts and propositions among themselves and each other are of a logical nature. The business of logical thinking is strictly limited to the achievement of the connections between concepts and propositions among each other, according to firmly laid down rules, which are the concern of logic. The concepts and propositions get meaning, viz. content, only through their connection with sense experiences. The connection of the latter with the former is purely intuitive, not itself of a logical nature. So our connections with the sense experience, the concepts and propositions get meaning, content, only through their connection with our sensual experiences. But that connection, only through their connection, but that connection is not, it's not purely intuitive or logical. What is it? The degree of uncertainty which this connection, the intuitive combination, can be undertaken, and nothing else, differentiates empty fantasy from scientific truth. The system of concepts is a creation of man, together with the rules of syntax, which constitute the structure of the conceptual systems. Now, as a side note, I would say also the philosopher came after Kant, post-Kantian Cassirer, was one that also embodied this type of synthetic approach to combining the sensual and the spiritual into one, or the mind and body split, and addressing it both from a humanistic and a mathematical point of view for his philosophy and his approach. He came up with what he called these structures, these conceptual systems, as symbolic systems, and they're strictly a creation of man, and a creation that man cannot escape, because it's now his only means of interacting with the environment. Let's continue. Einstein is explicit in identifying logic and syntax with operations of the world of mind, which are by no means reflections of events in the physical world, nor are they justified by the events in the physical world. Indeed, he is precise about the justifications for such mental activity, the world of mind. The production of some sort of order among sense impressions, this order being produced by the creation of general concepts, relations between these concepts, and by definite relations of some kind between the concepts and sense experience, in guiding us in the creation of such an order of sense experiences. Success alone is the determining factor. So that's our validation of these orders of sense experiences, is success. Or again, all our thinking is of this nature of free play with concepts. The justification for this play lies in the measure of survey over the experience of the senses, which we are able to achieve with its aid. The concept of truth cannot yet be applied to such a structure. See, all of our thinking of this nature of free play with concepts, the justification for this lies only in the measure of survey over the experience of the senses, of which we are able to achieve with its aid. The concept of truth cannot yet be applied to such a structure. Like Bateson, Einstein recognized the danger it's the danger of the power of a syntactic system when detached from its context. In an early stage, the words may correspond directly to impressions. At a later stage, this direct connection is lost, insofar as some words convey relations to perceptions only if used in or thing. The then word groups, rather than single words, refer to perceptions. When language becomes thus partially independent from the background of impressions, a greater coherence is gained. Only at this further development, where frequent use is made of so-called abstract concepts, which I believe Kant also called the symbolic systems, language becomes an instrument of reasoning in the true sense of the word. But it is also this development which turns language into a dangerous source of error and deception. Everything depends on the degree to which words and word combinations correspond to the world of impression. That's what Cassirer referred to as the functional basis in reality. Would be the degree to which these word combinations correspond to the world of impression. That's from Albert Einstein, also the common language of science. This is presentation of sentences like, the man cut down the tree with an axe. Give me a moment here, guys. Make sure I'm still online. All right. Let's see here. Are we online? Take a little quick break here. If you guys are around there, it'd be nice to hit that like. Okay, and just making sure we're still online there. Looks good. All right, we can continue. So, what we're talking about, this theme here, I want to break this down here. Bateson was elegant in his discussion of the consequences of the use of a highly distortive, linear verbal code. So linear, think of it, this, that, in a line, right? To represent the complex, not highly distorted, but complex. Recursive, meaning something that continually cycles back to itself, right? So it's an incremental type of recursive function, or something that would cause something to change, but in a pattern. So something is recursive, you could probably quantify as a frequency and such of how often it's recurring, but it's going through the same function over and over again with new input each time. It's recursive. Cybernetic, the term cybernetic in this context refers to actually steersmanship. So like if you're dead reckoning on a sailboat and you're heading towards a far distant object and you want to get there, you're going to be always on that tiller making subtle movements here and there. You don't just hold it in one place because you're going to drift and the wind's going to bring you one way. You're going to be making constant or continuous subtle movements to keep you on track towards your destination. And that's called a cybernetic approach. It's referring to steersmanship, like as in a boat. All right, so let's read this again. His theme constantly recurred. Bateson was elegant in his discussion of the consequences. So he's against using a highly distortive linear verbal code to represent what's really, in the real world, more accurately described as a complex, recursive, cybernetic natural world in, for example, his presentation of sentences like, all right, so let's see how he breaks this down syntactically. The man cut the tree down with an axe. This sentence is presumed to represent a complex interaction among three reasonably stable elements: a man, a tree, and an axe. The syntax of English codes into certain class of verbs, a notation of agency or causality, imputing to whatever noun occupies the subject position, if the verb is in active voice. A sense of agency. Notice, however, that there are other verbal codings of this interaction which are equally interesting from an epistemologist's position. Suppose we roughly paraphrase the linguistic representation, unpacking the verb so as to make it more obvious. All right, we got a new guest in here. All right, Dr. Hamzi. So we have the man caused the tree to be cut down using the instrument of an axe. So we're unpacking it. The man. So our first sentence was, the man cut the tree down with an axe. Now we're going to unpack this to be, the man caused the tree. Can I get these both on the screen? Sure we can. One more click, we should get them both on there. There we go. So the man cut down the tree with an axe. Now we could say the man caused the tree to be cut down using the instrument of an axe. Okay. Another way to appreciate what Bateson was warning us about is to consider the interaction functionally. All right. We got a Coke dog in the house here. Got to break down for that one there. Welcome. Okay, let's break this down. So, another way to appreciate what Bateson was warning about is to consider the interaction functionally. So, in a mathematical formula, right? We have the function of x results in y, where x is the man and y is the axe in the tree. The implicit claim revealed by this notation is that if you know by observation or by assignment the movements and actions of X, the man, then the consequences for the tree and axe are predictable. As Bateson pointed out, that's also true that if I know the movements of the axe, I can predict the movements and behavior of the man and the tree, at least in the tightly circumscribed context identified by the original sentence. In other words, the axe can be perceived as the independent variable x, and the man and the tree as the dependent variables y. Or, as an epistemological flexibility drill, note that if I make the notch cut in the tree after the first swing of the axe, the independent variable x, the actions and movements of the man and the axe become similarly predictable. We have appreciated R.D. Laing's fine coding of repression as forgetting that you forgot. Interesting concept. Repression is forgetting that you forgot. And this is insidious. Covert quality of our verbal code has something of this same character. So this is an interesting insight we have here, right? The fine coding of repression as forgetting that you forgot. And this insidious, covert quality of our verbal code has something of this same character. Note here, we are not saying that the original sentence is wrong, only that the syntax of natural language removes certain important perceptual choices, resulting in what we call the jackdaw epistemology, a belief system built on a single, unchanging perceptual position. It seems clear to us that at least some of the major practices which have created local environmental crises would be impossible if we were to routinely occupy multiple perceptual positions in our decision making, the triple description condition developed in the following text. Most importantly, we think, is the observation that the structure of the code we most commonly use in mediating our experience among ourselves and in our instructions with the world has built-in decisions which are deeply epistemological and of which we are unaware. As Bateson warns, unless there is some corrective rebalancing of these distortions, which are part of the structure of language, we, as a species, may well soon be, as they say in the major leagues, out of here. With hindsight, looking back from the 20th century to the classic 18th century, the empiricist position, it is relatively easy to understand the error in both logical typing and logical level committed by the empiricists. They confuse the rules which govern the operations of the physical world with the rules which govern the operations of the act of representing the physical world, the world of the mind. The rules that apply in the physical world do not necessarily apply in the representation of the physical world. The map is not the territory. To us, a central issue in examining epistemologies is how they account for the common situation that, given the same real-world experiences, two people will honestly report profound differences in what occurred. How this issue is addressed will strongly determine the questions of personal responsibility and the so-called mind-body split. We call your attention back to a portion of one of the statements by Einstein. The concepts and propositions get meaning, context, only through their connection with sense experiences. Remember the validation, the success. The connection of the latter with the former is purely intuitive, not itself of a logical nature. The degree of uncertainty which this connection, intuitive combination, can be undertaken, and nothing else differentiates empty fantasy from scientific truth. All right, we're summing it up here, guys. In effect, Einstein is warning that until this intuitive combination, this connecting of concepts and sense impressions is explicated, we cannot discriminate fantasy from fact in a deep sense. Our epistemologies are very shaky. Perhaps Bateson's finest contribution to this endeavor comes from his surprisingly simple notion of the transform. The human neurology, receiving certain signals at the peripheral sense organ, transforms that information from the physical world in a series of transforms, deleting and distorting it at each step until it reaches the central nervous system and it is accepted as reality. Epistemology thereby becomes a well-defined task to map the specific rules of transformation that information is subjected to in its long journey from world to consciousness. And this was his hope. This is what he warns us we ought to be about. Second here. Bates's transforms, fully explicated sometime in the future, will be the link which heals the Western mind-body split. The technology called neurolinguistic programming has become an explication of this intuitive combination of Einstein. These transforms of Bateson, the process tools of the four-tuple representational systems, synesthesia patterns, metamodels of language, all are cornerstones in the exploration of this mapping between sense impressions and concepts. Until this work is developed, the decisions which we inevitably must make to resolve differences will drift towards violence. This document makes a first step in this endeavor towards understanding. And I'd like to thank you all for joining me on this little journey of learning about epistemology. It's a very important topic for us to be focused on right now, because I think this is part of what a lot of the issues going on in the world are rooted in, is a misalignment of defective and distorted epistemologies causing people to do things which are not functionally related to the reality they exist in. Some with a lot of cultural baggage. On that note, give me just a moment here. I'm going to put on a little bit of a musical interlude as we're getting set up here, because I want to send everyone over to audit them. I think he's going to be doing some freedom style music here in just a moment. Let me get you his link here. Dive into epistemology. I think the more we know about it, the more we're going to be able to get more people on board with this. And again, it's a much better solution to the other things that we see on the table that our so-called leaders are proposing for us. On that note, I want to thank everybody for coming, and please subscribe to the channel. You don't always get notifications from what I'm hearing, even though if you hit the bell notification, but please do. Give me feedback and let me know how that's going. That's always good, and it will help the channel. On that note, I'd like to thank everyone for coming, and I'll see you guys over there at Audit Them's channel, and